And we went over to Brookline and I was able to get over there. And he said that the big deals of science in the 20th century were Einstein, the nuclear bomb, which Jeanette's grandfather built, enriched the uranium from 238 to 235 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, 4. Jim Watson, who took DNA and found not the sequencing of the human genome, but just the architecture, the double helix. And it was that architecture, Serge, that architecture which led to the continuing science, and then the technology, and then the proof of concept prototypes, and then the bioengineering, and ultimately they sequenced the human genome with the government involvement. But it's a whole journey of humanity using creativity with technology. Because I use Quora, which was built by a Fly Club guy in the class of 2003. I met a guy on Quora in Pretoria, South Africa, who was the memory champion of the world for that year. He can memorize 2,000 characters of pi, and you could give him any characters in that thing, and he could tell you what came before and what came after. Wow. It was his impression last April, with conversations on the internet, that convinced me that the platform that I've been building, and that the memory palaces that I learned about from Joshua Furr as well. He friended me on Facebook. On an Easter morning, I remember suddenly Joshua Furr friended me on Facebook. The memory palace, the platform, and what I was beginning to apply to myself, the protocol, the creative process, and trying to map it. In 2015, I discovered that there was a guy named David Perlmutter, and I used his book to realize that I could not eat grain or cane, no wheat, no sweet. That all of these industrial strength foods, or civilizational foods, were immediately turned into glucose and were turned into fat. I sort of said it only makes sense that if you eat fat, you get fat. Not so. And I, having spent 50, now 60 years in the pharmaceutical industry, doing global sales training, building large-scale instructional systems that have won prizes for productivity and innovation with Bristol Myers Squibb, that launched the first kidney transplant, the courses that taught how to use Sandimmune and cephalosporin. I realized that not only was I not doing the Lord's work, I was in league with the devil. In 2015, all I've learned and beginning to try out these methods, I had my birthday party, my 80th birthday, which Charlie's been regrets till his dying day that he didn't attend, but
that's right. He was a long way away.
But I was a happy fellow in my white tie.
You were great.
And last year I began to discover that different areas of science, they say that there are specialists and generalists. The specialists know more and more about less and less, and finally they end up knowing everything about nothing. And the generalists know less and less about more and more, and they finally knowing nothing about everything. Well, that's the category I'm in. I can say that I have reached I'm approximating knowing about nothingness. That's sort of a Buddhist thing. But the human genome, which they call the connectome, as it relates to the brain, the last map of the human brain before last summer was done in 1909 by a guy named Brodmann, something like that, the German man. And it is stood up until the present day that map of the brain. They've done a new one, and they used something called multimodal parcellation. That is, they used a lot of different techniques and were eclectic. Parcellation, they looked at the real estate, the parcels, and they found maybe 100, maybe 90 or 100 plus more areas that they didn't know what they were doing. But they only were really looking at the differences in the structure. Left brain, right brain, and they were able to find that these structures were unique, but they didn't find out what the function was. Without the function, they couldn't find out what the network was. Without the network, they couldn't find out what the interconnections were. Hold that thought. Last summer, I've been reading Raymond Kurzweil and The Singularity, which I've been reading for many years. But when he wrote about how to create a mind, I said, wow. And he looked at that, when I read that book, I realized he was trying to create a mind in technology, for technology. He wasn't trying to create an auxiliary mind. But in that book, I found on page 198, let's call it, that there was a guy at Harvard named Van J. Woodine who had written a paper in March of 2012 on the geometry of the brain. I had been building my structures with Rubik's cubes and so forth. When I got to that page, I said, holy moly, he has just discovered what I have hypothesized, that the mind is like the streets of Manhattan in a grid shape, because that's what the brain is like. I was doing it for the mind, he was doing it for the brain. I ran down my little driveway as best I could with my walker, and I see a lady standing on Hemlock Road. And I said, I've got to tell you, don't move. I wheeled down there, and it was a woman named Mrs. Miner. And I said, I've just come up with a architecture of the mind that has been confirmed in Raymond Kurzweil's book on how to create a mind. And I'm so excited I can't stand it. She said, well, we know Raymond Kurzweil. In fact, my husband works with him. And he's coming home in just a few minutes. And so I said, I can wait. He gets home, and it turns out, and the background for this is that I had decided that what technology was doing was they were reverse engineering the brain, the mind, and the body. And the brain was the computer processor. The mind was the operating system. And the body, God bless BF, well, I can now call Fred, because I got my record. The body are the apps. So the apps are doing in technology what the body does in reality. The Internet operating system, which iOS 10.4, or whatever we've got now, is the mind. And when Tracy Kidder wrote a book, The Soul of a New Machine, the soul is another word from antiquity for the mind. The mind is part of the soul of a human. That I couldn't believe it. Well, I'll tell you more about that. But there are books on fractal geometry, the thing that I'd written, that instructional development paradigms around object orientation and chaos theory, and how there are repeating patterns. I call it the Fern fractal phenomenon. And here we're talking about the fractal geometry of the brain, that there are repeating patterns. So here's what I've found. I found it's all about frameworks, and there's a whole framework that looks at the whole deal. We can put that in a digital framework and an interconnectable framework, a networkable framework, a functional framework. What does it do? A structural framework. What's its architecture? And a conceptual framework of how to think about it. So I've taken those ideas, and I'm going to tell you, revealing what I've come up with. And that is that the whole framework can be thought of and visualized here with Google Earth. New York City of Manhattan is a metaphor of the mind. It's a New York City state of mind, metaphorically right here. And that, of course, if you're using object, all the great discoveries, whether it's Leonardo da Vinci, who was a naturalist and was just looking at birds and looking at people and inventing things, or the guy who invented the Chinese characters, he was a naturalist. It's only analogical that the mind has to reflect reality. And that's why I showed you all those pictures of the buildings that I was involved with, including this building, where we did a complete remodeling with Len Davenport, and who knew how important it would be to things.
I have to tell you, Charlie.
You gotta go.
I do. I'm not supposed to be driving after dark until my operation in April. I'm so sorry. I'm fascinated, but maybe I'll just have to come
I'll give you
visit
one last sentence.
Okay.
That the metaphor of the mind of Manhattan, have you heard of something called germs, guns, and steel?
Oh, yes. Yes.
My classmate.
Really?
And I now think, and you can picture this, roads, rooms, and floors. And that gives you a visual picture for what we're talking about. Thank you for coming, Annie.
Oh, I'm so sorry, but I will
We don't want-
get in touch with you and we'll finish
I
it up.
hope the picture I showed you of my car crash inspired you to get out of here.
Anyway, no, I was fascinated by what you've been doing, and even since I've been here the last time,
Okay.
not far away. All right, nice to meet everybody.
Yes.
Nice to see
And,
you
Be
again.
careful.
Yeah, I'm not supposed to be here quite this,
So,
but I'm doing it.
bye-bye, Annie.
Bye-bye.
Take
See you
care.
later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
So, each of these directions, the up Fifth Avenue, that's the road, and I think of that as a way to imagine the creative problem-solving process as a protocol. And the rooms in these buildings either side are like memory palaces. And the floors are the levels and layers for the platform. What technology did was that they, out of Xerox PARC, where all the great technology came out of, we were Xerox PARC East when Xerox acquired us. And they acquired us for our brains. That was what the Wall Street Journal said. The brains, I figure our